Welcome to KBcast, the podcast for security executives, interviewing people from around the globe on how organizations can operate smarter and stay safer. Here's Carissa Breen.
I caught up with Wallon Walusayi from 3Data, and we spoke about virtual reality headsets and how their company is changing the way we approach working in a SOC. I did challenge Wallon on if this is exactly what we need in our space or if it's just another shiny new toy, and he handled the questions like an absolute champion. We talked about the behavior around implementing VR into everyday tasks for an employee, as well as the cost reduction associated from a SOC point of view. Wallon also talked about how data can be displayed differently using VR, which provides better insights. If you're keen to learn more about virtual reality for your organization, then this episode is for you, so please keep listening. Wallon, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a long time coming, and I say this a lot actually with people that I interview, but it's because I do want to interview so many people because they do so many incredible things, and I'm really excited to have you here today to talk a little bit about you, your experience, and also what you're doing with your company 3Data. So before we jump into that, we always like to start our podcast off with talking about you and your journey. So could you please talk our listeners through where you started to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think first and foremost, thanks for inviting me on here. You know, I'm a big fan of you and the podcast, so definitely excited to be on this podcast. Starting kind of my journey in big data and security was very untraditional. It started about 5 years ago, and I just got done working in New York with Nike as a analyst on their wearable team. I got back to my hometown in Milwaukee after kind of wrapping up that job and trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And one of my good friends heard I was home and gave me a call and said, I have this new Oculus VR headset, back in 2015, which a lot of people, again, weren't very familiar with. And he told me to come check it out. So as soon as I kind of got back to home and went over to his office to check it out, I was absolutely blown away by the technology of VR. And the premise of just being able to experience things without truly having to be there physically. But connecting people with, information and data was really what I was doing at Nike. So it became kind of an obsession for me. And I used my skill set in data analytics and wearable technology to start this company in my grandmother's garage in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, right? A lot of people thought I was absolutely nuts, talking about kind of virtual worlds and time travel, right? But VR wasn't very common back then. So we put out a quick demo, got a lot of attention from Fortune 500 companies, and things kind of took off from there. About 48 months later, now we have customers in DoD and Large Enterprise, and we're a venture-backed startup company. So it's been a wild journey to get to kind of where I am now, and really excited for where this is going to take us.
So when you talk about people thought you were crazy, why do you think that is? Is it because generally when things come out new in technology, everyone's like, it's not going to last, it's not going to survive? Is that sort of people's sort of MO in terms of their fallback because it's a new thing and they're not sure what to expect?
Absolutely. I think it was very similar to trying to communicate what a TV was, right? Before people have seen colored TVs or even black and white TVs. It sounds like it's kind of like, there are people in this TV that will be talking to you, and you can change, the people inside of this box to, look at information. It's very similar, right? If you've never seen it, it's very hard to explain completely immersing somebody in a virtual world. So I eventually had to, bring my parents over to my grandmother's house to say, this is what I'm doing. And then they kind of got why I was, so obsessed with it. But it's tough to communicate the power of it if people haven't tried it. And I think that's a larger part of the barrier to entry is how do you communicate something that, you really have to visualize and see in order to understand.
And when you said you started demoing this with Fortune 500 companies, what was sort of their adoption to it? Was it because it was new sort of toy that they hadn't really seen before and they wanted a piece of it? Or what was sort of their take towards it?
That's a great question. It was a little bit of both. We got, kind of scurried into the innovation teams. One thing I've learned is sometimes innovation teams are the places where startups go to die. And it's tough to tie that to, in all transparency, it's tough to kind of tie that to a business use case, right? When they're just trying to build innovation, no matter what that innovation is. But I think quickly people start to realize, after being able to see the technology grow and make strides from not only like an ergonomic standpoint, but a software standpoint, that this is a real technology that's going to be, here to stay. The fad kind of wore off and people started to develop real tools, whether it's training or productivity. There's a massive benefit from being able to adopt this technology and doing it earlier than, your competition. And that's kind of how we've been able to survive working with DoD and large enterprises. They're committed to the future, and it really takes that commitment to be able to be successful.
When you say real tech here to stay, why do you sort of think that is? Is it because, and maybe we'll sort of get into this a little bit later in the interview, do you think it's because maybe even the pandemic last year could have been the catalyst to people working from wherever and then, plugging in their VR headset to sort of do their job from wherever? Do you think that sort of helped with the adoption to this, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think COVID-19 expedited remote work in a way that no one expected. Having to go from kind of physical real estate and offices to now everyone's working remotely from wherever their house is. It changed the way that you kind of think about space and productivity. And it opened up new avenues to getting a lot more creative rather than the tools of today. There's nothing wrong with Skype or Zoom or, any of the alternatives, WebEx. But you're looking at tools that were developed pre-pandemic, right? They've been around for, almost a decade before people are now having to use them every day. They weren't built for the pandemic. So the opportunity to now innovate with remote work being the new norm is really exciting for us and opens up a brand new avenue for people who are now looking for more interactive and interesting ways to engage with their coworkers, their customers, and VR is becoming more and more relevant.
So on that note, let's jump into a little bit more about what you do day to day with 3Data. Now, for people who don't know, these guys are backed by Mark Cuban, and as we all know, that whatever Mark Cuban backs usually is a winner. And that was mentioned in that recent Forbes article. I think you did send me. But talk to me about what you guys do specifically for our listeners. Now, I look at a lot of technology startups across the globe. I haven't seen what you guys do really anywhere. So I think that's probably why Mark Cuban has invested in this quite early, early adopter, gets it, is a mover and shaker in that space. So really keen for you to sort of elaborate on what you guys do, because I'm assuming that our listeners would be really excited to hear exactly what it is that you do.
Yeah, and I appreciate the kind words. I think, more than, we kind of expected. It's been awesome working with Mark Cuban companies, and it's been really great to be able to be backed by someone of his stature, helping his portfolio companies, and he's really, invested in it, which is awesome. But when it comes to 3Data and kind of what we do, we built out what we're calling a smart collaboration platform, and it combines your video conferencing, real-time data feeds, and file sharing all into a unified space. What you can start to think about now is, imagine having your pretty much access to all of your business in a virtual room, being able to quickly bring up any sort of information collaboratively. And that's where we started to gain a lot of traction, was being one of the first companies to do that in not only a 2D space, but a 3D space. So we work on all major immersive headsets, whether that's VR headsets or augmented reality headsets, which are becoming more popular. We were one of the first companies to really build that on the cloud. So you can access it from anywhere. You can deploy it, anywhere. You can deploy it behind your own firewall, and then stream information into this collaborative space in real time. And that's really kind of where we start to again gain traction. But for a lot of these companies who are running global businesses, they don't really have a great way of handling IR sometimes. Imagine that you're somewhere across the country and your business has been hacked. What is typically the first thing you do as either a CIO or a CEO? It's get to, the fusion room or the intelligence room on site. COVID changed that forever. But trying to understand how many people are affected, who needs to know, what's the damage, where did this happen? There's a lot of different variables that come into a scenario like that. So being able to communicate that information in real time remotely can save companies millions of dollars if they're able to do it quickly.
What sort of info? And do you sort of have any use cases around that, or?
Yeah, a lot of the use cases that we've been able to identify is anything to do with cloud monitoring, network operations, security operations. When you're looking at tons and tons of digital information, think terabytes of information, right? How do you break down those silos and aggregate the insight instead of having to dig through logs and logs of information and siloed dashboards? What if you could unify all of that data into one space and then use tools like advanced visualizations or artificial intelligence to just surface that insight while you're trying to make decisions? We take out a lot of complexity when it comes to a lot of the massive amount of digital information that people are trying to digest and analyze. And just really deliver that insight, and being able to do it in real time is kind of the magic under the hood.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was a reporting analyst back in the day, and I was going around the security division in the bank and collecting all the information, from the guys in the SOC or whoever, and pulling it together. But I had to use a PowerPoint, right? So that's it was hard to communicate the importance of cybersecurity, and admittedly, we were using certain tooling to be able to help us with that. We eventually built live dashboards and Tableau and stuff like that. But for what you guys are doing, I think as you sort of touched on, it's really hard to display things in a way that people get, but then they're sort of not just lost in all of the data. It makes sense. And just reporting for reporting purposes is kind of redundant, and you need to be able to justify the insights derived from that data, right?
Exactly, and you hit the nail on the head. It's having to go to multiple sources of either teams or people or information to be able to aggregate all the data to get the ability to make the most intelligent decision. That should be a process that not fully automated, but it should be a pretty much an automated process so that you can start to just see information in context, right? Either as it comes in or be able to surface it based on time series. Because the two things that people, are always kind of attached to are where and when, right? The why is why you're there to figure that out. But if I could quickly, contextualize things of where and when in a visual manner, then you can start to dig into more of the forensics of why this happened. And that's really the nuance, when it comes to a lot of the data visualization and analytics is taking a lot of those kind of givens when it comes to the data that you're having to go and find and just focusing on the insight, why did this happen and correlating that across these different silos.
And that's really interesting because I think also what I'm hearing here is efficiency, because even in my own experience, every month I'd have to collate these reports, and because everyone was, we were reporting on phishing and vulnerability and whatever it was, there was 10 different things or plus. So I'd have to go physically around to each of these teams, be like, oh, do you have your reporting numbers? And it was like, no, because I'm flat out, because there's been an incident, you're frustrating me. And they'd know when I'd start walking around the floor that I was hitting them up for their insights. And I couldn't get it because I didn't have access to the systems that they were using, obviously for, privacy reasons. And I was only doing an analyst role. But for me, it became heavily inefficient because I'd spend most of my day following people up and getting them almost frustrated because I needed that information to be able to report back to the executives around how our security posture was sitting in the bank and what are the things we needed to do. So I think even from an influential point of view, displaying that in a way that makes sense to people outside of tech security is going to make it a hell of a lot more appealing, and I'd say expedite the process of them handing over money to be like, okay, cool, the way in which you guys have demonstrated the importance of X, Y, Z makes sense. Here's some money. Go do your thing.
Exactly. And it's really interesting, the common thread throughout all the different narratives that we've been able to find with the value proposition is communication, right? Because at the end of the day, it really boils down to how are you communicating all of this complex information, either to key stakeholders, to your superiors, or to your colleagues in the most efficient manner possible. and doing it in a way that's contextual and easy to do, it immediately draws that emotional connection to what you're trying to communicate, because we all understand things in 3D, right? Humans operate in three-dimensional manner all the time. So being able to give people something that they can see and understand that jumps out at them when it comes to, hey, this is why we need it. There's a massive benefit to being able to do that in an expedited manner, like you said.
So in your experience, how are people communicating currently what they're doing? I mean, I've just spoken about my experience. That was going back, 2014, 15 days. So it was quite a while ago. But what are you sort of seeing today? Like, how are people communicating the value of security?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think even pre-COVID, it wasn't too dissimilar from what you just explained. It's a PowerPoint, right? And you're stuffing all of this information into slides and trying to communicate how important it is through graphs and charts that are extremely complex. It's really hard to gain, any sort of traction with key stakeholders if they're not able to fully kind of comprehend what you're communicating to them, regardless of the visualizations that you're able to stick into a PowerPoint. But there's now an additional kind of layer of complexity that everyone's remote, right? So now not only are you trying to communicate a PowerPoint, you're trying to communicate it through a Skype call or a video conferencing platform that has no context. I don't have the same kind of person-to-person connection. It's me looking at you through a screen and then trying to also focus on, the PowerPoint.
People are distracted at home, right? Like,
exactly.
And cats and, people are getting served drinks in the background. Like,
yeah, it's a brand new world of trying to be productive while, dealing with this layer of complexity of being completely remote. But we've been able to break down a lot of those barriers for people and give them a more human-centric connection with easier visualization capabilities, right? So we can start to aggregate this information, takes a lot of the kind of manual labor out of it, and makes it a much more interactive experience rather than just the same old, same old. But it's very similar to what you were talking about, you were doing by walking around and trying to actually collect the information to build out the charts to communicate in the PowerPoint. That should be one step. And that's kind of what we've been able to automate and start to deploy for our customers.
But the interesting thing about that, if I think about it, was most of my time was spent either convincing someone that I need to get this every month at this date, or just project managing people or managing people's egos. A lot of my day was actually spent just doing that. Yeah. And that's not even that sort of like, it wasn't hard to do. It's just tedious and time consuming, right? So the actual value was in the implementation of the report in terms of updating it, but then also just making it look more appealing. That's what I should have been spending most of my time on, but I wasn't. It was doing the basic stuff like following up Jeff, John, and Joey about why they hadn't provided me with the insights that they know every month that they're supposed to provide me with.
Yep. And you'd be shocked at how many companies suffer a very similar kind of a pain point when it comes to just the collection of information. We've kind of coined this term data collaboration. When you're trying to, get a report or say a spreadsheet from somebody, to be able to insert that into your visualization tool, really quickly, it might not be the most updated information, right? As soon as it's sent to somebody else, they could have augmented it. It could be out of date. There could be different numbers. How do we unify that experience as well? Because then, it takes another level of kind of a failure point out of the equation, so that you can all be operating on the same information, looking at the same data without having to chase people down. It's populated because we're connected to that data source. And that just leaves it to a much easier querying capability of now we've kind of abstracted that to a visual interface, right? And that's really the exciting part about the technology is, how much further can we push that so that you can get information on demand rather than having to go and seek it from your data scientists or your analytics team. This should be delivered to you on demand like the rest of the data that we're consuming as people right now.
That's a very, very good point. And I wish that this was something that we had back then, because it was a very frustrating conversations that I had to go through. But let's dive into the psychology around the whole VR world.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's talk about VR headsets and the behavior around them at the moment. So when I was, thinking about this interview, I was looking back at the start of like smartphones, right? Like people weren't used to carrying around a phone in their pocket. And so the alternative was to sit at home and hopefully call someone who was also at home, right? Which sounds like sensible nowadays. So it's like, hopefully if I was calling you, I had to hope, because there's no real way of communicating to you back then, that you were also at home for me to have a phone call with you, which is mental, right? So the reason why I say that is because like now VR headsets, are not that common, like not everyone has one. So do you believe like the same adaptability will be there when it comes to casually going to work and then just plugging your VR headset as, the smartphone example that I used?
That's a great question. I think the analogy is similar. I spent a lot of time kind of thinking through, how to best communicate in my profession, the way that VR is going to evolve and gain traction. But I think the comparison with the cell phone is even I'd say a little bit more rudimentary than trying to get people to understand kind of where VR is going to go. Because if you look at the cell phone, we had computers as well, right? So 2D displays, and we can make the analogy of, hey, it's a computer in your pocket. VR doesn't get that benefit, right? It doesn't get the analogy of it's something that you've already seen before, but in your pocket. This is a brand new paradigm shift of 3D spaces that we're trying to kind of teach people the behavior of. And while, kind of operating in 2D screens has been the way that we've experienced information and compute, the psychological kind of part of immersing somebody in a full, virtual environment is a steep one, right? It's a steep kind of barrier to entry, because now we're redefining. It's called, virtual reality for a reason. Reality as we know it, right? Because now we're looking at things that we can be anywhere, be anyone, experience anything from a display, and it's a massive jump, especially generationally, that people who aren't as familiar with maneuvering around three-dimensional software or any sort of productivity tools. The Gen Z, I think they're going to be the ones to really pick this up and run with it, because they've grown up with technology. Video games are three-dimensional. They've always kind of been at the benefit of having technology, growing up. But a lot of the older generations, never grew up with three-dimensional video games or three-dimensional entertainment. It's always been very 2D and flat. So the psychological kind of obstacle of making that jump is a massive hurdle for a lot of people. But hopefully, as this becomes more and more relevant for productivity, and now that we're all remote, it's going to be a slower adoption, but it's going to happen. That and augmented reality are the two kind of new compute devices that I think are really going to transform the way that we understand information and interact with computers in much more of a human-centric way.
So how are you ensuring adoption is taking place in terms of the VR headsets? Only because Google Glass was kind of the future, and then wasn't, right? So
that's kind of to be said. Just didn't happen.
No, it didn't.
So I guess from an enthusiast standpoint, right? I think living in and working in VR for quite some time, I'd say almost five years now. I'm familiar with the technology. I see the potential. I understand the benefit, but I don't wear a headset every day, even as an enthusiast or a consumer of it. And we're the beneficiaries at 3Data of building our platform fully on the web. So if you ever have a kind of an instance where you want to get more fidelity into something, we always tell our users, hey, jump into a VR headset and look at things in 3D to try to understand any sort of anomalies or insights better, or be more engaged with the information. But it's really important to look at things as kind of meeting the consumer or customer where they are. So we have a full, kind of 2D interface that we give our customers as well, so that they can interact with the people in 3D. I think that bridge is what a lot of people aren't providing. Is how do you bridge people from, again, flat displays to now experiencing full three-dimensional compute? It's a brand new paradigm shift. And as much as I think, again, I would love if everyone was adopting VR right now, it's going to take some time. It's going to take a brand new workforce to come in and be more, I'd say, understand technology in a more immersive manner, figuratively and literally. But it's going to happen. This is the way that technology typically goes. It takes a couple of revisions before you get the ergonomically right fit for a lot of these headsets. We're putting, computers on their face, essentially. That's what we're doing. And it has to be something that people are willing to do, and similar to the way we put on glasses to augment our vision, right? It has to be ergonomically feasible for people to want to adopt this. So eventually it's going to happen as these headsets keep getting revised and augmented reality becomes more and more relevant, which is, again, holograms instead of putting you in virtual reality. But it's going to be a process. I don't think we're going to see this massive adoption just because of COVID. I think it's just going to expedite people's appetite for trying new headsets.
No, you're absolutely right. And I guess what I'm hearing here is really the ability to synthesize like data so rapidly, and hence sort of be able to sort of act faster from what, you've discussed here today, which is definitely the inevitable, right? Like as I've gone through my own personal experience and a loss of efficiencies. And I think if anything, if you're doing something different, like you have to be prepared for people to not understand you for a while. How long is that while? I don't know. Like, I'm not Nostradamus. Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm not even doing anything as hectic as what you guys are doing. And people, when I started this business, people were like, what are you doing? And so I was like, no, I know this is the future. This is how we should be communicating in terms of the security world. I just, had to wait for people to catch up. And when you are doing something so out there, you have to wait. So I agree with you. I also love a friend of mine down in Melbourne. He has a virtual reality headset for PlayStation. And I had it was so scary. And I had the gun. Admittedly, I got kind of tired because I was standing up for a while. But it was so fun. It was actually the sort of the step in playing PlayStation and then sort of, VR for work. So I get it, but I mean, let's see when the others sort of catch up.
Exactly. And that's a great example, right? Is taking that step from a gaming console where you're used to kind of playing in 3D to being inside of the game is a step that a lot of the gamers are willing to take, right? But when you talk about, a lot of the data analytics people, we're talking about people who are using Excel, Tableau is sometimes a stretch, right? And then now reinventing the way that they're looking at everything, and it's a jump, right?
It's scary,
a jump
right?
that we know. It's scary for a lot of people. It's true, but change is typically scary, and that's where we're trying to figure out. Is this something where you're willing to change behavior because it's hard? But VR makes it really easy because you see the benefit pretty quickly. And that's really kind of the mantra that we've had to adopt is, if you're willing to change, virtual reality or augmented reality is great for you. If you're looking to kind of stay the same and utilize the tools that you're used to using, that's always going to be an option. And we do have a 2D interface for you. But it's really just about, trying to be relevant in this new age of technology. Are you willing to commit to being relevant because you'll become irrelevant pretty quickly without trying to adapt new technology and innovate?
Now, I know that we sort of touched on this a little bit in terms of what you guys are doing in the security space, but
sure.
just to sort of touch on what we've just been talking about a little deeper here would you say in terms of the VR approach for SOCs, will that become quite ubiquitous as we usher into a new way of operating? Yes, COVID's one thing, but just a lot of the examples that you've given today, would you say that, SOC analysts, for example, this is going to be their new environment? This is what we're going to expect from your perspective? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. And, this is something that we've had to really think through as far as how is this going to impact security operations centers for, not only a new way of securing the operation and the workforce, but then being able to distribute this now remotely because of the job gap of, there's not enough analysts for all the security jobs that we need right now. So can we also lower that barrier to entry? But I do believe VR will eventually become, ubiquitous with SOCs because it's just the increase in information that you're able to ingest and visualize, right? if you think about why SOCs were constructed, it's to visualize and correlate as much information as possible using 2D displays. But the problem is you're always going to be restricted to physical space. And that's always going to be a factor, right? Not only the cost of building these SOCs, but then trying to add additional bodies to the SOC is expensive. So with a fully kind of virtual environment, now physical space is no longer a factor. You have infinite real estate to be able to customize and display as much information as you can from a cognitive kind of ability. But the physical real estate and the cost, barrier are the massive kind of problems for people even having a SOC. A lot of the SMBs can't even afford a SOC. So now can we, provide a much kind of cheaper alternative that could be arguably more productive for a remote workforce? It's really a massive shift in the way that people kind of think about security operations centers. It's all about how much money, how big it is, how many screens you have, what data feeds you have. That's all very physical and material when it comes to security operations centers. So we're really trying to shift that narrative to let's just build out a more productive virtual collaboration space that allows you to have more monitors if that's what you're looking to do. But then also connect all the information in a way that's a lot easier to understand. And you don't have to be a cybersecurity expert in order to see anomalies. It's just more of a cognitive ability rather than an analytical ability. So that's really where things, again, start to get exciting for us from a security perspective is how do we start to represent a lot of the information in a connected manner intuitively so that anyone can see an anomaly.
Considering this is an executive podcast, when we talk about cost reduction, people's ears prick up a little bit quicker.
Sure.
Percentage-wise, just say you've got a traditional SOC and then you've got your solution. How much, this is ballpark, like this sounds to be exact, like how much in terms of percentage would companies be saving if they were to sort of go, okay, well, it's costing us a lot of money to have all these people in this massive SOC with all these screens and whatever else going in there. How much money percentage-wise would companies save to this alternative solution?
It's another great question, and it's something that we've kind of done cost estimates with the way that our customers are using the product today. Depending on how big the SOC is, how many people you have in the SOC, average price of the SOC is anywhere from $5 to $10 million for a lot of these large enterprises.
Just to reiterate, that's USD, right? So that's
USD. Sorry, in USD, and that would be again for a pretty standard SOC. It gets more and more elaborate. $50 million is probably the biggest SOC that we've worked with. But as far as that goes, we can provide, if they were to go fully virtual, a 90% reduction in operational costs. And that's where people start to get excited because now you're talking about a brand new budget, right? That's basically taking out all of your expenses when it comes to security operations, which are mostly just people and overhead, and it's crazy to have to think about, being able to save people $30, $40 million just by moving completely to a virtual construct. But it's the reality of the situation. Change is hard, but it's, again, the benefit and the budget that you're able to win if you're able to reduce overhead, by orders of magnitude.
So I guess when you're starting to talk those numbers, that's quite significant savings, right? So I guess that's probably going to start the conversation just right there. Like, this is an executive podcast, so all types of people, not just CISOs listen, but, CEOs and, even CFOs, you get them really excited just talking about those numbers. So I guess it's a big driver. And like you said, like, it's overhead. So it's not like they're eating into the budget in terms of capability. It's more just like basic stuff that is not necessarily adding towards like the security capability. It's just like screens and real estate. So you're not taking anything away, so to speak.
Exactly. And that's the way that we've kind of ushered it in with a lot of different SOCs. We don't try to rip and replace. That's very painful for a lot of companies to know that you just spent, $50 million on a SOC that no one's going to use. And it's kind of the reality of COVID. But when you start to think of it as an augmentation, right, you can emulate one-to-one all of the data feeds from your SOC and now add additional remote workers to increase the visibility and the remediation of any issues. People start to be a lot more open to this virtual SOC, this virtual construct. So there's a lot of different ways that we've kind of approached it from a narrative perspective. But the goal is to be able to provide a much better and smarter way of collaborating when it comes to data and security information.
Now, I know that you guys in the US, you guys are a bit more progressive than us down here in Australia. So for what you're saying, do you think it scares people? Because, I mean, I speak to people all over the globe, but people are really trying to get their head above the water with current security problems, right? And now you guys are like, oh, yeah, so we're just going to, like, introduce VR for software.
Yeah.
So what's sort of been the response? Because as soon as you start talking that, like, people are already stressed out of their brain, and now you're introducing another layer of complexity to their current situation, right?
Yeah. I mean, and the word that keeps coming up, right, is scary. It is a massive change. And every time there is a massive change, it's going to be scary. And somebody has to put their name behind it, right, and say, I want to change the way that we're doing things. And that's a scary thing to do, especially as a professional. And it takes somebody who, again, has that eye on the future and willing to be the one who co-signs, a new initiative to be able to get drastic changes. When we talk about 90% reduction in OpEx, it's going to take a drastic change to be able to do that. Those things don't happen incrementally, right? So it's been a process of trying to communicate a new endpoint, right, that you're adding to the network. That has, again, vulnerabilities if you really want to kind of look at it from a security standpoint. But it's that commitment to staying, on the competitive edge that's going to allow you to be ahead of your adversaries on the cyber battlefield, And that's really the trade-off is, are you willing to commit to something new and change in order to not only, have a competitive advantage on the cyber battlefield, but then drastically reduce costs. And it's going to be a massive change for you. It takes those thought leaders, the people who are futurists, the people who, really want to be the ones to bring it into their organization and be the hero, that are able to adopt this technology quickly. And we've been very fortunate to work with those sort of individuals within these massive organizations.
And I guess from your point of view, it's kind of finding that equilibrium, right? Like, yes, it's scary, but if we don't adapt and change, like, we're doing a disservice for what we're supposed to do, which is protecting stuff, right? So, like, eventually you're going to have to get past that point.
And if you don't, what's the alternative? It's irrelevancy, right? You're going to become irrelevant very quickly, doing the same things that you've always done. And the cyber battlefield is evolving every day. If you don't start to develop new strategies, new technology, new ways of incorporating either more individuals to help you, or new ways of visualizing information and understanding it more interactively and intimately, that's got to be a decision that you have to make and understand the consequences of not doing that. So that's, kind of the position. We're not here to convince anyone on virtual or augmented reality. That's going to happen on an individual basis. But it's really just finding that persona of, someone who wants to be the leader of an organization and wants to usher in the future. That's been, the way that we've been able to have success for our company.
So who do you think is currently leading in that space?
It really depends. It really depends on the industry. There's a lot of very innovative people from automotive and energy that we've been working with. They have been some of the easier people to work with as far as how do we shake things up and start to implement new technology and get full buy-in from the top. But it's been mostly people in the automotive and energy space who are mostly adopting, this new technology and running with it. And the benefits that they're seeing are massive. The DoD again is very committed to immersive technologies here in the U.S. It's been awesome to be a part of that transition with them. But it's been mostly those industries that I've been able to, work with and been able to usher in the future.
Speaking about people being scared, a lot of that generally comes from just constant education. So how are you guys sort of at 3D helping shape the education around implementing VR for businesses and getting employees upskilled in the utilization of VR for their day-to-day tasks?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's an ongoing effort, right? It's a lot of education around the technology itself, rather than trying to focus on our productivity tool and the collaboration platform. We focus on, what is it that you are trying to find value in, right? And then being very realistic about what it's going to take to get there. A lot of these companies are still trying to figure out how to get to the cloud, right? And move their data and migrate their data from an off-prem, OCI or Oracle server to a hybrid cloud solution that, they're looking to utilize. It's tough to find the right mix when it comes to the people who are really enthusiastic about VR, but don't have the proper infrastructure to make that jump. There's a couple more steps that they need to make before being able to use a cloud-based VR solution on their network. But it's been, a lot of education around the technology itself. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do. We're using VR and AR technologies, but these are the benefits that we're able to measure very quickly as soon as you're able to adopt the technology. So it's a very realistic and kind of an honest approach that we've taken with people. I think that eases people's awareness when it comes to the risks associated with the technology. But being honest with people about what VR can do, it's not going to solve every one of your problems. It's not going to magically make your network impenetrable. But it's going to give you a massive increase in ways that we can not only optimize the operational costs associated with your SOC, but now start to look at the remote assistant perspective of you can start to hire people from anywhere in the world to also protect you. So it's again, an educational process. We're very honest with people about what this technology can do, but the people who are committed see massive benefits very quickly.
Really, really appreciate it. I think that I like your thoughts at the end there around people anywhere can help protect you, no matter where they're based in the world. So I think that'll definitely create more collaborative teams, remote teams. So decentralized teams as well. I'm a big believer in that. So really appreciate it, Wallon. You have absolutely killed the interview. Really,
you made it very easy. You made it very easy on me. So thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
So my last question would be, if people have a question for you that I didn't ask you today, how can they go about getting in contact with you?
Yeah, they can find me on Twitter. It's just my username is Wallon, Wallon, with the underscore at the end. I'm an active Twitter participant, so feel free to just ping me on there. LinkedIn, Wallon Walusayi. Go ahead and search me on there. Or reach out to 3Data directly if you're looking to find out more about what we're doing. The website is 3Data, 3DATA.io. And happy to have conversations with anyone who's interested in, again, a virtual security operations solution or more of a smart collaboration platform. But those are the best ways to kind of reach me. And again, I love talking about this stuff and happy to talk with any thought leaders like yourself, Carissa, because I really enjoy this.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Wallon.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to KB Cast, the cybersecurity podcast for executives. We always value your support and would love it if you could leave us a review or a comment on your platform of choice, iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. And that's always appreciated. Till next time.